Hi, everyone, and welcome to our third and final webinar together. My name is Christina Crowley-Arkley, proud dairy farmer's daughter, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today for our third and final webinar as we take you through our agenda and our speakers on the topic of soil management and feed production. We appreciate again, like always, the last 3 weeks that you've been taking the time before Easter and long weekend to join us for a very valuable conversation for both you as our dairy farmers and for our Canadian consumers on the topic of sustainability. We'd ask just some friendly reminders and housekeeping. We'd ask that you please keep your cameras and microphones off. We are asking you to ask any questions. Feel free as we go throughout our webinar today. There is a Q&A box at the top there that you will be able to ask your questions. And of course, like we mentioned before, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to you in a follow-up link. So if you do need to watch the replay, you will be able to do so. Again, we want to thank Dairy Farmers of Canada who funded this project. This webinar was organized by Lactanet, but thank you to Dairy Farmers of Canada for funding this as part of the Dairy Farmers of Canada National Dairy Knowledge Transfer Project. So a huge thank you to DFC. Of course, we've had 3 weeks together. Our first topic 3 weeks ago was about herd management and feeding. Last week, we heard from speakers about genetics and manure management. And this week, like I mentioned, we're going to be covering soil management and feed production with our speakers. We're going to be joined by 3 individuals today who are going to be speaking with us. We're going to be hearing from Hannah Sweet, our knowledge transfer specialist at Lactanet, who will be giving us an overview of sustainability. We'll then be followed by Jean-Philippe Leroche, who is our expert in dairy production, specifically in nutrition and forages, who works for Lactanet as well. And then we're going to be joined by our guest farmer, Michael Bureau of Middleview Farms, who's going to be sharing his farm practices relating to soil management and feed production. I will pass it over to Hannah to kick things off and give us a brief introduction about our sustainability topic.
Hello, everyone. So for those of you who were with us for the last 2 weeks, just bear with me a little bit. I'm going to give a brief overview of the why behind these webinars for those who are just joining us for the first time this week. So when we are interested in the environment and how it relates to agriculture production, we can evaluate the impact of different activities, as well as how better practices will reduce these impacts. And this can also be applied to issues or contributions related to the economy as well as society. Now, the purpose of these webinars is not to cover all of these issues, even if they concern or involve dairy producers or their stakeholders, such as employees, their customers, as well as suppliers, or even the society that's nourished by food products. Firstly, because we wouldn't have the time, but also because these days it's still impossible to put all of this into an equation to find that desired balance or the miracle recipe. Sustainability is therefore a concept that encompasses different things, depending on the perspective that we consider, and also depending on who talks about it and to who we talk about it with. To be sustainable then means finding the balance or making the best compromises between aspects that affect the environment, the economy, as well as society. And so our goal is to take a perspective that is in line with the key issues of sustainability, in particular those centered around the commitments that have been made by the dairy sector that will lead to medium to long-term results. A lot of these commitments are at the provincial and national level, including the net zero target by 2050 for the Canadian government, as well as the dairy sector with an intermediate target of low carbon milk by then. Other national commitments include the Global Methane Pledge to reduce methane emissions by 2030, as well as other sustainability strategies and roadmaps. This includes commitments from all players in the dairy processing industry with targets for reducing the carbon footprint of processed dairy products to which on-farm greenhouse gases emit the most or contribute the most. These include science-based targets that will help us meet those commitments and limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees by 2100. And so this is why we have chosen to structure the 3 webinars this way, by selecting themes that are key to the carbon neutrality strategy. We will refer regularly to many of these themes that are showcased throughout the Dairy Farmers of Canada's Best Managed Practices Guide. And as you can see in this admissions trajectory here, we're going to the goal of carbon neutrality is to balance by 2050 all greenhouse gas emissions associated with dairy production through the adoption of good practices that aim at reducing emissions as shown in blue and eliminating or removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through the sustainable sequestration of carbon in biomass and soils, and those removals are shown here in yellow. Now, we are aware that emissions will never be zero, and this is why it's important to focus on the best managed practices and increasing sequestration. So when we think about dairy production, there's 3 main greenhouse gases that are of concern, shown here in the figure. So they're mainly carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And each of these have a different impact on climate change per unit of mass. And so methane is about 30 times more impacting than carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide is up to 300 times more impacting. By estimating the carbon footprint, we're essentially able to assess the inventory for these 3 greenhouse gases, taking a life cycle perspective where the entire value chain is considered, not just what is happening on the dairy farm. So these include greenhouse gas emissions from operation upstream of the farm that they may indirectly contribute to the dairy farm's ability to operate. Carbon sequestration in soils and biomass, as well as grasslands and perennial plants or trees and hedges, is also an important aspect of achieving carbon neutrality, as it essentially creates a carbon dioxide sink that adds to the reduction in the overall greenhouse gas inventory. And so therefore, with this inventory exercise, we are then able to calculate what is called the carbon footprint of milk. Next slide, please. Thank you. In addition to providing an actual number of how much greenhouse gases are emitted per kilogram of milk, the carbon footprint allows us to identify the farm activities or inputs that generate the highest level of emissions so that we can essentially prioritize our actions to mitigate those greenhouse gas emissions. And so as we can see on the pie chart here, by decreasing importance, enteric methane, feed production, and manure management are the 3 largest contributors to the carbon footprint of milk here in Canada. And this is from the latest study that was conducted by the Dairy Farmers of Canada. It is important to note, however, that this assessment for 2016 does not include carbon sequestration or losses in the inventory. And so to wrap this all up, the goal of this series of 3 webinars was to highlight ways of reducing the carbon footprint of your dairy operations, where a number of actions and good practices can have an impact, and many of these you may already be implementing on your farm. And with that, I will pass it over to Christina.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah. I feel like I always learn a lot when you are speaking about that topic, and I'll be able to have some great speaking notes when we're talking about sustainability in Canadian dairy from what you have taught us, Hannah. We're now going to hear from Jean-Philippe Laroche, who is an expert in dairy production, specifically nutrition and forages with Lactanet. A little bit about Jean-Philippe before he joins us. He grew up on a dairy farm and graduated from agronomy from University from Laval in 2018, and has also completed a master's degree in animal science, during which he received several distinctions. Jean-Philippe is a member of the Order of Agronomists of Quebec, and he's well known for his skills and his interest in farm sustainability. Specifically, forage valorization by ruminants is a subject that he's particularly passionate about, which I hope, Jean-Philippe, we learn exactly what that is and what that means for our Canadian dairy farmers. He joined the Lactanet's innovation and development team in 2020, and during his career, he has been involved in various research projects related to dairy cattle nutrition and forage production. So he's the right person to learn from today on this topic. I'll pass it over to you, Jean-Philippe.
Thank you, Christina. I'll share my screen. Should work. There you go. So you should see my screen. If not, just tell me, but I think it should work. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk to you about soil management and feed production, but more specifically on how we can lower the carbon footprint and the environmental footprint of those aspects. So the first thing I want to look at with you guys is the dairy farm and the cycle of production that we have. So obviously in a dairy farm, we have the livestock who will produce manure that's going to be reused for crops. And those crops will be reused by the livestock to feed them, obviously. The dairy farm can also import grain from another grain farm and is also going to be exporting feeds, but also byproducts. So obviously we're going to export milk, animals, but also in some cases manure and crops. If we take a step back, we can see that the food industry obviously is going to produce food, but that food production has byproducts. If we think about soybean meal, for example, it's a byproduct of the soybean industry and the oil and tofu production, for example. We can also have spent grains or many other meals like canola meals that's going to be used by the livestock on our farm. The food industry can also produce byproduct that's going to be used by grain farm, such as organic waste. And those organic waste can also be used by the dairy farm, of course. If we take a further step back, we can see that the crops is what provides the food industry with food. So for example, if we take the same example of soybean meal. Well, obviously, to produce soybean meal and soybean products, we have to grow soybean in our fields. And if we look downstream at the end of the farm, the industry is also going to be using food, and it can also use manure to produce energy, for example, and to produce residues. If we think about the biogas that's produced by anaerobic digestion plant, sorry. And those residues could be then reused by the farm and also by the grain farm that's producing for the dairy farm. So a dairy farm is therefore a part of a whole bioeconomy, and production in the field is one of the key components of this bioeconomy, and not just on the dairy farm. We're typically in a circular, within a circular economy in which production in the field is recurrent. So you can see that the feed production, whether on a dairy farm or on a grain farm, is central to the economic sustainability. Consequently, the environmental performance of feed production becomes one of the keys to the environmental sustainability of dairy production. This step back that we have just taken make it possible to realize two important things. First, the field and the soil constitute an important capital for a dairy producer, even if it's not only its land that is at stake, but also those of actors throughout the value chain. It's therefore important to maintain this natural capital in health so that it's productive and sustainable. Secondly, when one performs an environmental assessment of milk, for example, a GHG or greenhouse gas assessment, and we want to calculate the milk carbon footprint of milk, one must consider as long as possible all of these connections that we see on the screen to consider the impact of the operation that don't take place directly on the dairy farm. So here we're going to look at three indicators of environmental sustainability by starting with carbon footprint. We see that we have the evaluation for 2011 and 2016, and we have different colors to show the different aspects of the carbon footprint for 1 kilogram of milk. In green, that's the aspect we're going to look at more closely, the feed production, and we can see that the feed production will constitute about 28 to 30% of the carbon footprint of milk. And three main emissions are going to contribute to that feed production aspect. So mainly the nitrogen oxide from soils, the CO2 from machinery, and the greenhouse gas associated with the production of fertilizers. The study also assessed water consumption per kilogram of milk. So as you can see, nearly 75% of the water consumed is associated with feed production, which may raise issues of water availability depending on the region of Canada, just as this availability may be affected in the future in the context of climate change. It should be noted that this profile is a Canadian average, and water consumption for food production varies greatly from one province to another across Canada, depending on whether irrigation is used or not. And finally, there's a third indicator, is land use. Obviously, almost all of the land that we use for dairy farming is used for feed production. This raises the issue of the dependence of dairy production on the health of soil, which we know are naturally associated to interdependent natural, physical, and biological cycles, the carbon and water cycles, which enable life and biotic production. Uh, their capacity to sequester carbon is also another important aspect, and their role in supporting biodiversity. If we look closely in the aspect of feed production, we see that in the left graph that we saw earlier, 22% of the milk carbon footprint comes from on-farm feeding production, but only 6% comes from purchased feed production. And if you look at the table on your right, we can see the amount of dry matter, of kilograms of dry matter used per kilograms of fat and protein corrected milk. So obviously, as we all know, the on-farm feed represent the vast majority of the kilograms used to produce a kilogram of milk. And if we look at the difference between 2011 and 2016, we see that it takes less feed to produce a kilogram of milk. So that means we're more efficient. We can produce the same amount of milk with less feeds, and that means less environmental impact too. Here we can look at the greenhouse gas emission per megajoules, which is a unit of energy. It's similar to megacalories, and we have different feeds. So the first place we have alfalfa, which obviously will provide protein but also energy, and we also have annual crops at the right. What we can see is that when we compare alfalfa to annual crops, we can have up to 3 times lower emission per megajoules of energy for perennials. And even when we look at the difference between different annual plants, we can see that it can vary by a factor of 2. So the feed that we use on the farm don't always mean the same environmental impact. And in that case, we can see that forages are really interesting for that. If we look at the same, but for protein, so the CO2 equivalents per gram of protein, and we compare alfalfa to canola meal, we can say the same thing. So basically, the forages are really interesting in terms of emissions per grams of proteins. In fact, we have 2 times lower emissions for alfalfa when we compare for canola meal. So what that tells us is that using a lot of forages on a farm will reduce the amount of greenhouse gas produced by the feed associated with the feed production. But we also need to remember that having higher forages in the ration or in the diet will increase also the enteric methane. So it's really complex. So when we want to see if a practice has an interesting impact on the farm, we need to assess all the impacts on the farm, not just on a specific section. If we dig into the forage production to see where does the emission come from, here we can see on the left graph corn silage on the left and hay crop mixtures on the right. And we see the kilograms of CO2 equivalent by kilograms of dry matter. And the what we can see here in the two different type of forage is pretty similar. So the majority of the emissions come from nitrous oxide associated with the soil. On the second place, we have the carbon dioxide emitted from machinery use, especially at harvesting. We know we have a lot of evaporation at harvesting and it emits a lot of CO2, about 25% per kilogram of dry matter for dry matter. And in third, we have the greenhouse gas associated from mineral fertilizer supply. Another thing that's interesting to look at in that graph is that hay crops generally have a lower environmental footprint than corn silage when we think about carbon dioxide emission. And the other thing that I want to tell you guys before we move on to the next slide is that carbon sequestration is not accounted in those graphs. And the reason is that depending on the farm, depending on the field, you may be in a situation where your hay crop will increase the carbon level of the soils. But if you already have high level of carbon in that soil and it's saturated, it may not sequester more carbon. So it's really important when we assess carbon sequestration to take into consideration the actual level of carbon in the soil of the farm. There's a lot of recommended practice to lower the carbon footprint of the forage production. Here we're going to look at how we can lower the nitrous oxide emission from soils and mineral fertilizer inputs. And we also have the co-benefits, which are not necessarily associated with the carbon balance, but can also have another environmental positive impact. So for example, the first strategy is to have an adequate crop rotation. So when you have a good crop rotation, after a grassland or a hay crop, you're going to have nitrogen that's going to be used by the next crop. And if you can calculate the amount of nitrogen that you're going to save, it's not only interesting for the economic aspect, but it will also lower the nitrous oxide production. And we need also to remember that including legumes like alfalfa or trefoil is really interesting to provide nitrogen to the grass in the mixture or to the next crop. Obviously, testing and analysis is another really interesting practice, and it's one of the key principles that you probably already know, the 4R: right source, right time, right place, right rate. So in order to have the right rate of fertilizer, you need to test your soils. So to know how much phosphorus and potassium that there's in the soil. And you can also test the organic inputs that you're going to use, for example, manure, to really evaluate how much nitrogen that's going to be given to the crop. Then with your advisor, you can find out the right rate. So don't hesitate to ask your field advisor to help you doing that. And finally, you can maximize organic inputs. We can talk about composted manure, which has many advantages over with emissions. We talked about it in the last webinar. So if you want more information on that practice, you may look at that the second webinar. And obviously, we're going to have a lot of co-benefits for this practice. Again, we're talking with the nitrous oxide emission, how to reduce that. Another strategy is to have enhanced efficiency fertilizers that will lower the nitrous oxide emission to give the the right amount of nitrogen to the plant where it needs it. And also, as a co-benefit, you will reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus loss and associated issues, for example, eutrophication of the lakes and river. We also want to have the fertilizer at the right time, so we're talking about split application. For organic fertilizer, we talk about rapid incorporation. For example, in Quebec, we recommend to incorporate the manure in 24 hours, ideally. And we also have that co-benefit of reducing nitrogen and phosphorus loss. Lastly, we can talk about precision agriculture to really have the right dose at the right place in the field and with a co-benefit of reducing machinery and fuel use. Here we're going to look at how we can reduce the carbon dioxide associated with the emission from machinery. So there's two main strategies that we can look at, or two main themes. First is to change the machinery, or second is to reduce the use of machinery. So if you want to reduce the emission of the machinery, you can look at fuel efficiency by having the right maintenance, or you can also replace or upgrade equipment if it's a good time to do it, and if it's interesting for the economic part too. Obviously, we hear more and more about fuel conversion. We hear about alternative fuel like electric tractor, which is really new, but I never saw it on a real farm for now in Canada. But I think we need to be to look at this and see if it's going to be interesting also for the economic part. It's nice to mention also that it could be really interesting from a greenhouse gas perspective, especially in the provinces where the electricity comes from renewable energy. There's also biodiesel, which is really interesting because when you look at the carbon cycle, even if the carbon dioxide is produced by the biodiesel, it accounts for zero when the experts try to calculate the carbon footprint of milk. And the reason is that that carbon comes from biogenic sources. And especially in areas where we have anaerobic digestion plants, biomethane could also be an alternative fuel that's interesting. And finally, we can reduce the use of machinery. In a lot of provinces in Canada, we talk more and more about reducing tillage, for example, no-till or other techniques like that, with the co-benefit of reducing compaction and reducing carbon loss in the fields. And again, we can talk also about precision agriculture, which has the co-benefit to minimize inputs like fertilizer and pest control. So right now we're going to move to the second part of my presentation, and I'm going to talk about land management. To introduce the subject, I would first like to give you an overview of what can happen when a decision is taken in relation to land management. For example, when it's decided to assign a particular use to a piece of land, a field, and then to work it. In theory, a lot of things can happen because a given intervention can affect the following properties or characteristic, which concern the properties of the soil on the one hand and living species on the other. I'm not going to list them one by one, though. But all of these characteristics make up what we are known as the ecosystem services that soil can provide. As well as offering the potential for biomass growth, these services contribute to overall resilience to a warmer, drier climate and extreme events. It can be said that the good condition of full potential of these properties characterize a healthy soil and contributes to the ecosystem quality beyond the surface soil, since there are interactions and regulations with what goes on below and in the vicinity. Ultimately, these ecosystem services contribute to feed and food production. Their sustainability is therefore contributes to our food security. So any change brought about by the human intervention will affect these services either positively or negatively. What we all want is to improve the sustainability of our land or to avoid misusing the land and depleting the level of these ecosystem services. Let's take a closer look at one of these services, that of carbon sequestration. As you all know, there's a lot to talk about this subject. So here you can see a map of Canada that was produced by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in 2016. In green, you see areas where there's a large decrease of carbon in the soil. So that means carbon emission by the soil. And in brown, you can see that the regions where there's a large increase in carbon in the soil. So here we are talking about carbon sequestration. So we can note that in prairies, there's a relatively low carbon in the soil, but it's increasing due to good practices that are being implemented by the producers there. For example, reduction in tillage intensity and reduction of area under summer fallow. In eastern Canada, there's a relatively high carbon level in the soil, but it's decreasing. And the main reason is that there's a steady conversion of tame pasture and hayland to annual crops, which do not increase soil organic matter as much as perennial crops. Here, the researchers at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada try to predict the risk of carbon degradation in our soil, assuming the practice that we had in 2016 were maintained, and assuming an optimal level of carbon in the soils. So what we can see here is that in the prairies, there are a lot of regions where the risk is low that the soil will be emitting carbon. But there are still zones in which there's a moderate risk, probably because there's more annual crops in those regions. And when we look at Eastern Canada, if we don't change the practice that we had in 2016, well, there's a moderate to high risk that we're going to lose more carbon. So in Eastern Canada, we need to make a change to really increase the carbon in our soils. Here we're going to talk about other strategies that's going to impact the economic ecosystemic services, for example, wetland conservation. So the actions that you could take on the farm is to consider restoring wetlands or to avoid draining existing wetlands. There is a lot of benefits associated with those two actions. The first being that wetlands is a significant carbon sink. So if you destroy a wetland, you're going to emit a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. Also, those wetlands are very rich in biodiversity and can help you control water. So for example, if you have a drought and you need water, obviously you can take the water in that wetland, but also if there's a flooding, well, it can contribute to lower the flooding on the around. Another strategy is regarding maintaining grassland. So there's a couple of actions that we can take here. First being keep or increase grassland area, reseed and fertilize as needed, control invasive plant, or practice rotational grazing on pasture land. If you do pasture land or grazing, it's important to note that you want to use an appropriate occupation ratio and timing to avoid manure excess and soil compaction. And all those strategies will have a couple of benefits. The most interesting, obviously, is carbon sink. Like we saw in Quebec, if we reduce the amount of grassland, we're going to the soil is going to emit carbon into the atmosphere. We also have an improved soil health with grassland and improved biodiversity with the co-benefit of having a feed security for the farm. We can also plant trees, hedgerows, and shelter belts. So the actions that we can take here is to conserve existing areas, design with support from agroforestry advisors, or to plan maintenance activities to ensure that those trees are not going to impact negatively the work that you do on the farm. These will give you a lot of benefits. The first being increasing soil and biomass carbon stocks, reduce wind erosion, increase water retention for adjacent plots, reduce soil temperatures in adjacent plant, and improving biodiversity by providing habitat to the fauna. There's also the riparian buffer zones, with the actions being regular maintenance of those zones and redesign or add trees or shrubs. And the benefits associated with that is carbon storage, specifically if you add trees or shrubs. Obviously, it's going to be a wonderful habitat for biodiversity, and it's going to be a barrier to nutrient runoff, to waterways from eroded soils and water runoff. The Kona benefit here is interesting. It will also reduce eutrophication and sediment overload in lakes and rivers. Here we're going to talk about agricultural soil management, so strategies that you can have into the field. There's a couple of actions here. It's not the complete list. There's probably a lot more strategies that you can implement to your farm, but these are really interesting. You can minimize tillage level. You can cover crop after annual crop, and you can also diversify crop rotation and include perennials and legumes. There's a lot of benefits and co-benefits associated with those strategies. For example, soil compaction reduction, soil carbon loss reduction, and fuel economy, if we talk about reduced tillage. We can also control erosion, improve soil health, optimize the nutrient inputs, and the soil carbon storage. So a couple of take-home messages here. I tried to show you a complete overview of the best management practices that we have in the feed production category and the land management. But you need to remember that every farm is unique, and especially across Canada, we have different contexts. So it's really important to analyze your own situation, ideally with the help of an advisor, to really identify the best practice that you could have on your farm, and that will improve the durability of your production. If you want more information on the strategies that we just discussed here, you can look at the document that was produced by the Dairy Farmers of Canada. That's going to help you see the different best management practices that we saw over the 3 webinars. To complete, I just want to say that the land management is central to soil health, conservation, or improvement and feed security for your herd. Maintaining or increasing grassland and perennial cropping is the key so that carbon sequestration can add to greenhouse gas emission reductions. So with that, thank you a lot. And if we have time for questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Jean-Philippe. I feel like there's so much that you provided there that I feel like I'm going to have to go back and watch it again to take in all the information, because there is a lot to soak up, and it's extremely helpful information for our audience and of course for our industry professionals as well, for all of us to learn about the sustainability journey and what this means. I know I don't see any questions in our Q&A box. I do know you're going to be joining us in a little bit after our next presenter. So by chance, if anyone has any questions, we'll feel free to keep you there as well. But thank you so much for all of that amazing information. I'm now very excited to be introducing our guest farmer or speaker today. Welcome to Michael Bureau of Mildewview Farms. He's going to be interviewed by Diane LeQuinn, who's our strategic advisor at Lactanet. Michael, just briefly, I'll give you a quick introduction. He's a dairy farm farmer living in the village of St. George de Clarenville in Quebec. And after this, the presentation of his family farm, he's going to be interviewed by Diane. But in terms of what we're going to learning from what Jean-Philippe just taught us and what we're going to learn from Michael is he's going to discuss the best management practices that his family introduced on his farm years ago and are still using today. So I will pass it over to you, Michael. We look forward to learning from you.
Hello, my name is Michael Bro. Welcome to Middleview Farms. I'm a co-owner with my parents Serge and Monica and with my sister Shannon as well. My parents bought the farm in 1989 and we built a new barn in 2016 with 2 milking robots and a compost bedded back. Compost is mixed twice a day and wood shavings are added about once a week. We have 100 cows in lactation with an average of 12,000 liters per cow per lactation. Right now, for the last month, we have an average of 38 liters a day with a fat test of 4.5, and we produce around 155 kilos of quota. We farm 200 hectares and we rent another 75. We grow corn, corn silage, soybeans, winter rye, and alfalfa. The land that we rent is mainly used for dry hay for the heifers. Some of our sustainable off-field practices includes the compost bedded pack. Cows are really comfortable, so they last longer in the herd. It's also an added value in the field. It tests very well in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. One of our main priorities on the farm is the cow comfort. That was kind of the main reasoning for going with our bed pack. In the long term, we aim to raise as few heifers as possible. We also want to have as few cows as possible to produce our quota. This will increase our profitability, but will also improve sustainability and improve our impact on the environment.
Hello, my name is Diane Lequin, Strategic Advisor at Lactanet. I've been working with Middleview Farm to offer them advisory services in feeding and management since June 2020. So it's my pleasure to introduce you Michael Bro.
Bonjour.
Michael, can you describe the rotations you use on the farm?
So a normal rotation for us is grain corn, corn silage, soybeans, and winter rye. That would be basically our normal rotation. But then also in some fields, we'll add alfalfa into the rotation. So we don't really consider that as our normal rotation because not all fields will go into alfalfa. We mainly try to target fields that are close to the farm, which makes it easier for us to do haylage.
So, what challenges does this type of rotation bring, and how did you deal with them?
I'd say the biggest challenge is that we always need a certain amount of corn silage to meet the cow's needs. The same thing goes for haylage. We also make corn silage for my brother who owns the farm next door, which means more land dedicated to just feeding the cows. So, a certain amount of land has to be dedicated to corn silage and haylage. And so that limits us in how we try and fit our rotation in, which has helped us a lot recently is that we bought new land of about 100 acres. So it really gives us more possibilities to implement the rotation that we want to do.
What benefits and advantages do you see to this type of rotation?
It helps to limit disease transmission. Also, the rotation helps for controlling weeds. So changing from year to year, the type of crop that you grow breaks the cycle of disease and weeds. It also helps a lot with soil health. The more variety you have in your soil, the more your organic matter will increase. And that's really what drives yield. Also for the winter rye, it changes the period of time that we're going to be working the field.
Ça fait moins d'ouvrage le printemps.
So we're planting it in the fall, which means less work in the spring, and then the harvesting takes place at a different time during the summer.
Ça fait moins de travail au.
So then that removes some of the work during the spring and the fall.
It balances out the work more over the summer.
Ouais. Aussi pour le sec d'automne, à cause que c'est récolté plus tôt dans l'année.
Yeah, exactly. And also for the winter rye, because it's harvested earlier in the year, the initial goal we had was we wanted it to give us more time to do field work like drainage and leveling.
Ça nous donne plus de temps pour faire ça.
Would you like to tell us about the context that led your farm to improve its field practices?
Alors moi puis mon père.
So my father and I, we always had an interest in integrating cover crops into our rotation. We knew it was something good to do, that it was a good practice to have.
Que, ouais, comme dans le fond, on voulait implanter dans notre.
As for my sister, she had always been interested in planting windbreaks in the field to fight erosion and improve our impact on the environment.
Brise-vent dans les champs.
So it was just kind of like a family agreement that this is something we wanted to do. One thing we've been doing for around the last 25 years is strip tilling. We use a machine called a zone till. It prepares the soil in strips. Initially, it was something my father wanted to do just to help for managing the rocks in the fields. We have quite sandy soils and we have lots of rocks. So mainly it was used to help for that, but then over time we realized that that's something that really benefits the soil to have minimum tillage. And for the soybeans, we do completely no till. We started mainly using cover crops about 2 to 3 years ago, and it's something we want to try and implement more and more.
D'en faire plus.
Michael, what was the main purpose of adopting cover crops?
Mainly our aim then and now is to keep the soil covered at all time to fight erosion, also for compaction.
Principalement pour combattre l'érosion.
So for example, after corn silage, the soil is uncovered for quite a long time.
C'est beaucoup de chance, justement.
It's completely bare. There's a really high risk of erosion. And also it really does help to reduce compaction and improve soil health.
Okay. Erosion, we're talking mainly about water erosion?
And also the wind. We're in a region that gets lots of wind, and more we're having winters where there's not much snow. So having something in the ground, having roots in the soil really helps for keeping the soil together and preventing erosions of all types.
Do you see any other benefits besides erosion control to cover crops?
Yeah, so it helps a lot with compaction, and depending on the type of crop you choose, you can have green manures that will enrich the soil. You could have crops that fix nitrogen. You can have crops that have really deep and large root systems to help against compaction. So in general, it just like has an overall improvement of the soil's health, which can lead to being able to use less fertilizer, and that has a major impact on profitability and also on the environment.
I imagine that from a ration standpoint, you can use these crops as feed if you need it too.
Comme après le sec d'automne,
Yes, like after the winter wheat, we do a crop of peas and oats. That's something that we're able to chop for the cows. And it tests quite well, actually really well from what we've seen for the past 3 years. So it's a really interesting crop that we can do.
Are there any challenges you faced when you wanted to grow cover crops? And what solution have you found to meet those challenges?
ben, on est encore un peu dans le milieu de trouver les solutions pour ça.
So we're still a little bit in the middle of finding out solutions for different types of cover crops. An issue is what kind of crop to use and also the timing of when to seed it. So one big challenge we had was with corn silage. We find that by the end of the year after we've harvested it, it's too late.
On trouve que à la fin de l'année, quand on a récolté l'ensilage, c'est trop tard et souvent la culture.
We're really busy at that time, and so the crop doesn't grow as well.
Très occupé. On a essayé cette année.
Last year we tried broadcasting a cover crop at the same time as granular fertilizer before the rows close, but the results were not very good. We tried it in one field and it didn't go well, so now we need to figure out if the solution is to change a type of crop.
Pas super bien été. Alors là, c'est à voir, est-ce que la solution, c'est de changer de
or if it's because we didn't seed it at the right time, and maybe that's why we didn't get good results.
So we come back to what you were saying earlier about doing small-scale tests to be able to adjust.
Ça, c'était la première année qu'on avait.
That was the first year we had tried that. So that's kind of the thing about doing it small scales. We did it in one field that didn't work well, so now we'll try something else. And if it's something that we find something that works well, then we can expand to doing it in all of our corn silage fields.
De réessayer.
Est-ce que tu vois tes
Do you see your fields as having the same advantages as a cover crop?
Oui, mais
Yes, even better, I'd say. Alfalfa will fix nitrogen, for one. And also, it's a crop that you have for multiple years in the field. And so it really has time to create an extensive root system in the soil, which will help a lot for decompaction.
de racines qui peut décompacter le sol.
Est-ce que la mortalité
Is winter mortality an issue in your area?
Yes, it's definitely an issue. Every year we look at how the winter affected the alfalfa fields, and then we adjust depending on what the results are. Ideally, we like to try and keep the fields for at least 4 years. One thing that we've done to extend the life of our fields is if we had a lot of alfalfa winter kill, we seed clover into our mix, and then so that kind of adds some value to the field and helps extend its life a little bit. If we have a winter where we have a lot of winter kill and a lot of the alfalfa didn't make it, that's when we see that the clover that we've added kind of takes charge and grows more and spreads, and then we still have really good yield. So by adding that, we add to the life of the field while maintaining a good yield and maintaining a quality silage for the cows. So it's a really interesting way for us to fight one of our challenges.
Façon de combattre ce défi-là.
OK. Fait que c'est un
Therefore, it's synergy between the different plant that makes the yield. So we were talking about the sustainable practices of cover crops and crop rotation. Silage yield are good. How are the yields of the other crops you grow? Because in soybean, you don't use strip cropping for now.
En général, c'est très bien. Le maïs grain, le maïs.
Overall, it's very good. Grain corn and corn silage in general, we have very good yields. I think there should be a picture on the screen that shows a summary of our yields. Since we've been growing the winter rye, the yields for that have been really, really good, both for grain and the straw, so that's really encouraging. I'd say our only weakness is for the soya. I think because it's no-till, our yields are a little bit lower. It's something that we want to try and fix in the future and see how we can increase our yield. Maybe if we start zone tilling for the soya as well, that's something that will help for the yields.
Pour faire la culture en bande avec le soya aussi.
OK. Parce que dans le soya, vous n'utilisez
OK.
pas la culture en bande pour le moment.
OK.
OK. Vous pratiquez
You
le
practice
travail
minimum tillage and strip cropping. What are the benefits you get from these practices?
de ces pratiques-là.
Mais ça nous libère beaucoup de temps.
It frees up a lot of our time. We don't have to do any field work in the fall. There's less tillage to do in the spring. And it's also a type of tillage that's a lot easier for the tractors to do. It's less demanding, so it reduces our fuel consumption. The zone till is a machine that you could drive quite quickly, and it's easy machine to operate. There's also less passes in the field, so it's only one tillage operation. There's less traffic in the fields, which equals less compaction. It also reduces diesel consumption, and that's also not only savings financially, but also has a positive impact for the environment.
Pour notre impact sur l'environnement.
Alors, c'est non seulement bon pour l'environnement.
It's also good for the farm's profitability. Does reduced tillage pose any challenges to the farm?
Pour l'entreprise.
The main challenge is weeds. With minimal tillage or no tillage, it's a lot harder to manage that issue.
In addition to minimum tillage, are there any other sustainable practices carried out by the farm that are worthy of mention?
La façon qu'on sèche notre maïs.
Yes, the way we dry the corn. Since we're in reduced tillage, we don't want to make tracks in the field when we harvest in the fall. So for corn, we'll wait until the ground is frozen before harvesting. So because we do it later, the corn is also a little bit drier. And so we dry it in the silo. So when we harvest it, we put it in the silo, and then we have fans that we run that will freeze the corn, and then the drying will only be done in the spring. And so when it thaws in the spring, then we turn the fans back on, and then that will dry out the corn. A big advantage of that is also there's much less transport at harvest. It's just directly from the field into the silo, so we don't have to bring it to a drying plant. And there's also saving the cost of drying it with the conventional methods.
Ça va direct dans le silo et c'est ventilé et après c'est fini.
Et au niveau des champs,
And at field level, it doesn't make tracks on the ground.
No, exactly.
Therefore, you win on two fronts.
Yeah.
What achievements or practices are you most proud of?
plus fiers.
I'd say there's two practices that we're most proud of. Is well, the first one for my father in particular is staying loyal to the practices of no-till and minimal tillage. It's something he's been doing for 25 years. Back then, it was definitely not a very popular practice, but he stuck with it even when many people doubted if it was a good idea. He kept on going with it, and now it's proven that it's a really good practice. I personally am very proud about how we've incorporated the winter rye into our rotation. It really gives us a lot of flexibility on when we can work in the fields in terms of doing drainage and leveling, but also the flexibility for the types of cover crops that we could grow, that we could put into silage. Also, the winter rye allows us to produce our own straw. So there's just like multiple gains that we can get from producing this crop.
Puis autre
Then, in addition to the technical gains, are the economic gains there?
So yes, there is economic gains. If you look at just the price of ton of grain corn versus winter rye, then no, you would think it's not worth it. But then when you start to calculate the benefit to the soil, the straw that we can harvest ourselves, if you added all those things together, then it becomes a lot more interesting.
C'est beaucoup plus intéressant.
It's sustainable and profitable. Have your sustainable practices, such as soil cultivation, minimum tillage, and crop rotation, had an impact on your soil health? And if so, how do you see it?
Ben, en regardant nos analyses de sol, en regardant principalement la matière organique.
When we look at our soil samples, we look mainly at organic matter. We tend to have rather sandy soils, so we aim for an organic matter of 3 to 5%, 5 being very good and 3 is acceptable. We're really pretty much in those figures. I'd say we average around 4.5 looking at the soil samples from 2012, 2016, and 2022.
C'est en regardant les analyses de 2012, 2016 et 2022.
Quels sont les prochains?
What are the next steps or practices you'd like to put in place to make your business even more sustainable?
On aimerait ça pousser encore plus les cultures de couverture.
We'd like to push cover crops into our rotation even further. The optimal goal would be to have as many possible every year and on as many fields as possible. Also to continue with cover crops that would act like green manures or that will fix nitrogen to get even more gains for our soil to improve the organic matter. We also want to plant more windbreaks just to help with wind erosion.
Des haies brise-vent. Juste pour combattre l'érosion.
We also would like to change our fertilization practices, mainly try and do field by field dosages. So basically assess where we can reduce the dose or if we want to maximize the harvest, apply more.
Certains champs, on peut diminuer la dose ou, ou si on veut maximiser les récoltes, en mettre plus, juste pour...
Basically just so that we apply the right dose where it really needs it. Because that's when we'll be able to really make a lot of savings and also it has a really big impact on sustainability.
Pouvoir faire beaucoup d'économies et aussi ça a vraiment un très gros impact sur la durabilité.
Alors, le bon dosage.
So, the right dosage of the right fertilizer at the right place. Okay, Michael, what advice would you give to someone who wants to implement these sustainable practices on his or her farm?
Commencer simple. Commencer par une chose à la fois.
I'd say start simple, start with one thing at a time. All the practices we do on the farm, we didn't just start them all at once. It was one thing and then another and then another. So if you want to start cover crops, try it on one field and see how it goes. With tillage practices, it's harder to start small, but if it's possible, you can rent a machine or make modifications just for one field only. I think it's pretty feasible to do experiments without taking significant risks or without investing too much. But mainly, I'd say it's really important to remain patient because a lot of these types of changes are not something that you'll see results immediately, but it's something that you'll see over time.
Aussi, je dirais principalement de rester patient parce que ces changements-là, tu vas peut-être pas nécessairement voir un résultat tout de suite, mais c'est quelque chose avec le temps que tu vas vraiment voir des améliorations. Aussi, je pense c'est
I think it's really important to surround yourself with people you can trust, people who are specialists in their field. An agronome or your advisor can give you different ideas, can discuss things with you. Sometimes just having someone from outside of the farm, they'll have a different perception, a different point of view. When you're doing the same thing every day, sometimes it's hard to see things differently.
Quelqu'un à l'extérieur de l'entreprise ont un différent vue sur les choses. Quand tu es dans la même chose à tous les jours, des fois, on a la misère de voir d'autres choses.
Okay, Michael. What advice would you give to someone who wants to implement these sustainable practices on his or her farm?
Je crois
I think what drives us most to implement these practices is that not only are they sustainable, but they're also profitable. So you really get the best of both worlds.
Vraiment chercher le meilleur des deux mondes.
Ben, merci beaucoup, Michael, pour ton temps.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your time and knowledge, and have a good spring coming up.
Merci, ça a fait
Thank you.
plaisir.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael and Diane, for the presentation. I did want to ask Michael, because I don't believe it was mentioned in the interview, but if I'm not mistaken, you're in the process of measuring your GHG inventory at the farms through your greenhouse gas emissions. Could you tell us what motivated you to embark on that and what you hope to gain from it in the future?
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons. I mean, there's the financial aspect of just being able to, the potential of maybe being able to sell carbon credits. So that was one of the aspects that came into it. A second one was just having a better idea of what our emissions are. Just, knowledge is power. So just having where are we at and what type of improvements can we make to get better. And just in general, like that's just something that as a group we find important, is to try and improve our sustainability, and we do think that that's something that the consumer is gonna want to see as well in the future.
I appreciate that. You've clearly put a lot of thought into that, and there's a lot to learn from what we heard from you in your interview with Diane for other farmers to learn from about what they can do on farm. So really appreciate your time, Michael.
No problem.
Thank you. We are just going to go into because I know it is 3 o'clock and we're wrapping up, but we would like to do a bit of an overview of a summary of best practices, if you will, because we know that this is a topic that includes a lot to learn. And of course, there's going to be a lot of takeaways for our farming audience. So what the next 3 slides are going to do are just going to summarize the best management practices that have been associated with our theme today of talking about feed production and land management. So, and of course, all of this is going to be included in the Dairy Farmers of Canada guide that we will provide the QR code at the end for, that you can have access to for free. But what you're seeing on this slide here is a summary of whether the practice helps to sequester carbon, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and whether it contributes to the resiliency in climate change and improves soil health and biodiversity. So in addition, and this is feed production that we're specifically talking about, it's a qualitative estimate of the return on investment that's provided, as well as a GHG mitigation potential made possible by the introduction of the practice. So i.e. reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration. So this table here being presented shows the practices implemented that we saw by Michael, our guest farmer today, which he was able to tell us about. And you can see that he ticks all the boxes, so to speak, when it comes to feed production in best management practices. So hats off to him and what him and his family are doing on the farm. Now, our next slide speaks to practicing for our nutrient stewardship. And this table specifically addresses the practices associated with fertilization, i.e. the 4 Rs. And what is noteworthy is the high return on investment and the multiple benefits of organic amendments. Naturally, this is a widespread practice among dairy farmers, but it is estimated that 9% of Canadian dairy farms were not using organic amendments of any form in 2022. So there's definitely room for improvement here when it comes to practicing for our nutrient stewardship. Lastly, in terms of summarizing our best management practices, when we're speaking about land management, and this table recalls, it notes that the GHG mitigation potential indicated in our last column, as well as the return on investment to the left, provides an order of magnitude, given that there is always great variability in practice from one farm to the other. But it should be kept in mind that all practices help to increase the resiliency of land and feed production for future climatic events. So whether that's related to temperature or precipitation, this is an increasingly important aspect to consider these days and in the years to come when you're farming. So just three very helpful summaries of our best management practices, again, when we're talking about land management. This has been a lot of information today. We hope you found this really valuable. And of course, like me, you may need to go home and watch it again when we send out the recording. A lot of this information that we've been talking about both today and in our last 3 webinars can be found in best management practices in the guide that has been provided by Dairy Farmers of Canada. So if you do pull out your smartphone and you take you pull out your photo app and you're able to access this QR code, it will take you directly to this NetZero by 2050 Best Management Practices Guide offered by DFC. Now, of course, we have offered a ton of information here on sustainable practices that may be of interest to you. So if you'd like to find out more, there are a number of resources, both on Dairy Farmers of Canada's website, on the ProAction website specifically, and on Lactanet's website. So again, if you have your smartphone in front of you and you pull it out and scan this QR code, it will take you directly to the link that has all of these resources provided for you, because we have provided a lot of information to take in. If you are interested in more program information, especially around incentives relating to sustainability practices, if you scan this QR code here as well, it will take you directly to a number of the programs and incentives that are provided as part of this project being, as we're learning about today. Now, of course, this is the final 3rd webinar that we have did in this series about sustainability. So we'd like to applaud Dairy Farmers of Canada for funding this. And thank you so much as well to Lactanet for organizing all of these. And of course, this has all been part, as I mentioned, as part of the DFC National Dairy Knowledge Transfer Project. So again, thank you so much to Dairy Farmers of Canada for doing this. Thank you to our speakers today, to Hannah, Jean-Philippe, and Michael, and of course to Diane in interviewing. We appreciate your participation as our speakers. To all of our speakers in the last 3 weeks, it has certainly been a lot of information that we've been learning on in this journey together. And like I mentioned, this is the final 3rd and final webinar that completes our series. So we hope this information presented has motivated you in what there is to learn, and of course to be more sustainable on your farms. If you'd like to review any of the webinars that we've recorded and we'll be sending out, we will be making them available on the Lactanet website shortly, along with all the information on resources and programs, incentives, and funding programs. So the email will come out with next week, most likely, with the links that you will need. But again, it's been a pleasure to be with you on this learning journey the last 3 weeks. We really thank you, our farmers and our industry professionals, for joining us here today. We hope you keep well and have a wonderful Easter weekend ahead. Thank you again for joining us.